I stood in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, staring at the electrician's business card while my coffee went cold. Martin had seemed like such a nice man when he arrived at 8 sharp to rewire our 70-year-old Victorian. My children, Emma and David, had insisted I finally modernize the place after my husband Richard passed 2 years ago. They'd even researched contractors and scheduled everything while I grieved. But now Martin was descending the attic stairs with a face drained of color, his toolbox forgotten somewhere above. He gripped my wrist hard enough to leave marks. "Ma'am, please listen carefully," he whispered, glancing toward the hallway where my children were supposed to be reviewing estate documents in Richard's old study. "Pack a bag and leave this house immediately. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Don't ask me questions. Just go." Then he walked straight out my front door, leaving it wide open to the October wind. I couldn't move. Whatever he'd found in that attic involved my children somehow. Subscribe and comment your state, because this gets worse than you can imagine. The attic ladder still hung down from the ceiling, swaying slightly. I'd been up there maybe twice in 40 years, both times decades ago when we stored Christmas decorations. Richard had always handled anything above the second floor. My hands shook as I gripped the wooden rungs, my 63-year-old knees protesting with each step upward. The smell hit me first, fresh paint mixed with something chemical and sweet that made my stomach turn. Someone had installed bright LED work lights that illuminated everything with surgical clarity. The dusty, cobweb-filled space I remembered had been transformed into something else entirely. Clean plywood covered the old joists. A mini refrigerator hummed in the corner next to a desk with 3 computer monitors. Filing cabinets lined one wall. Everything was organized, operational, lived in. This wasn't storage. This was an office. My children had built a secret office in my attic, and I had no idea what they'd been doing up here. I approached the desk on legs that barely supported me. The monitors were in sleep mode, but I jiggled the mouse, and they blazed to life without password protection. Spreadsheets filled every screen, column after column of numbers, dates, property addresses. My address. Richard's life insurance policy number jumped out at me, $750,000, paid out 14 months ago. I'd signed papers my children brought me, too grief-stricken to read carefully, trusting Emma when she said the money was going into a trust for my security. These spreadsheets told a different story. Transfers, investments, property purchases in both their names. Not a penny in any trust bearing my name. My vision blurred. I clicked frantically through folders. One was labeled Mom's Medications. Inside were research documents about drug interactions, dosage escalations, and something called Cognitive Decline Acceleration Protocols. Another folder contained scanned copies of power of attorney documents I didn't remember signing. The filing cabinets weren't locked. I yanked open the first drawer and found it packed with manila folders organized by date. I pulled one from 3 months ago. Inside were printouts of my bank statements with highlighted sections showing my signature on withdrawal slips I'd never written, forged signatures. My children had been forging my signature. The folder also contained photographs, me walking into my neurologist's office, me at the grocery store looking confused by the checkout machine, me sitting alone on my porch in my bathrobe at what the timestamp showed was 2 in the afternoon. They'd been documenting me, building some kind of case. The next folder held draft legal documents for a conservatorship petition claiming I was mentally incompetent. My daughter's handwritten notes filled the margins. Need 3 more medical opinions, and Judge Morrison is sympathetic to family concerns. I heard voices downstairs, Emma and David, calling for me. "Mom, where did the electrician go? Mom?" Their footsteps moved through the first floor, then started up the main staircase toward the second floor. Panic locked my muscles. If they found me up here, if they knew I'd discovered everything, what would they do? The medications folder flashed through my mind. I looked around desperately for another exit, but there was only the ladder. I was trapped 70 feet above ground in my own attic while my children hunted for me through the house below. Think, Margaret, think. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. But who would I call? The police? And tell them what, exactly? That my children had an office in my attic? That was technically still my house, still my property. They'd probably been paying for all these renovations with my own money. The footsteps reached the second-floor landing. "Mom, Your coffee's getting cold. Emma's voice carried that edge of impatience she'd developed in the months after Richard died, that tone suggesting I was being difficult again. I couldn't let them find me here, not yet. I needed evidence I could take with me. My hands moved fast despite the trembling. I photographed spreadsheets with my phone, snapped pictures of the forged signatures, the medical research, the conservatorship drafts. My phone's shutter sound seemed deafening in the silent attic. Each click felt like a scream announcing my presence. I grabbed a handful of documents from the filing cabinet and stuffed them inside my cardigan, the paper crinkling loudly against my chest. The footsteps paused right below the attic entrance. "Is that ladder down?" David asked. My heart stopped. I held my breath, frozen beside the filing cabinet like a child playing hide-and-seek. "She probably went for a walk," Emma replied, her voice drifting away toward the master bedroom. "You know how she gets. Forgets she has appointments, just wanders off." "It's getting worse, David. Dr. Patterson agreed the decline is accelerating exactly as we anticipated." The words hit harder than any physical blow. They wanted me to decline. They needed me to decline. Everything in this attic office was designed to either make it happen or make it appear to happen. I waited until their footsteps descended back to the first floor before I moved. Every document I touched revealed another layer of betrayal. A folder labeled Timeline laid out their entire plan in David's precise handwriting. Stage 1 was encouraging my dependence. Stage 2 involved controlling my medical care and medications. Stage 3 was legal conservatorship, and Stage 4 was listed simply as memory care placement, sell property. They'd scheduled my entire dismantling across 18 months. I found the medication log next. They'd been giving me extra doses of my blood pressure medicine mixed into my morning orange juice, enough to make me dizzy and confused, but not enough to send me to the hospital. The log included careful notes. "Mom forgot grocery list again, good sign," and "disorientation episode in Target parking lot, bystanders concerned. Excellent." They were poisoning me. Not enough to kill me, just enough to make me seem incompetent. My own children were systematically destroying my credibility, my autonomy, my mind. The folders kept coming, each one worse than the last. They'd contacted 3 different memory care facilities, all charging between $8,000 and $12,000 monthly. They'd calculated exactly how long my assets would last at each facility. One email printout from Emma to David read, "The Meadowbrook home estimates 18 months maximum before funds depleted, then Medicaid. We'll have the house and investments clear. Dad would understand we're just being practical." The floor creaked below me. They were coming back upstairs. I shoved as many documents as I could carry into my cardigan and moved toward the ladder. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump so hard I knocked against the desk. The monitors flickered. I pulled out my phone and saw a text from my sister Janet. "Still coming to my place for lunch today?" Today was Tuesday. We had lunch every Tuesday at Janet's house, had done so for 20 years. My children knew this. They'd scheduled the electrician for a Tuesday morning, knowing I'd be leaving anyway, probably thinking they could blame any discovery on Workman's curiosity. But they hadn't counted on Martin's conscience. I texted back with shaking fingers. "Coming now. Emergency. Don't call. Just wait for me." Janet would understand. She'd been suspicious of my children's helpfulness since Richard's funeral, had said their grief seemed performative, calculated. I climbed down that ladder, moving faster than I'd moved in years, adrenaline overriding arthritis and fear. My feet hit the second-floor hallway just as Emma emerged from the master bedroom. "Mom, there you are. We were worried." Her face arranged itself into concern, but I could see her eyes scanning me, cataloging. Did I look confused? Disoriented? Were my clothes disheveled? I forced myself to smile normally. I was just checking that the electrician didn't damage anything upstairs when he rushed out. Very odd man. Said he had an emergency and left. I kept my voice light, casual, everything I'd practiced being before I knew my own children were my enemies. Emma's expression relaxed slightly. "Well, we'll need to call another electrician. This rewiring is important, Mom. The house could catch fire with these old wires." The house could catch fire. Was that another plan I hadn't found yet? "I'm actually running late for lunch at Janet's," I said, moving toward the stairs with forced casualness while my cardigan crackled with stolen documents. We're doing our usual Tuesday thing. I'll be back around 4. David appeared at the bottom of the staircase, blocking my path with his tall frame. He'd inherited Richard's height, but none of his warmth. Mom, we really need to go over these estate documents today. It's important. Can't you skip Janet's just this once? The pressure in his voice was new, or maybe I'd just never noticed it before. How many times had they pressured me into signing things, doing things, taking extra pills? How many times had I complied because they were my children and I trusted them? The documents can wait until tomorrow, I said firmly, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. Janet is expecting me. I pushed past David before he could argue further. I grabbed my purse from the kitchen counter and walked out the front door into crisp October sunshine that felt like freedom. My car sat in the driveway, keys already in my purse, because Tuesday was Janet's day and I'd prepared before Martin arrived. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key into the ignition. In my rearview mirror, I saw Emma and David standing in the doorway watching me. They didn't try to stop me. Why would they? I was just a confused old woman going to her sister's house like I did every Tuesday. They had no idea I'd climbed into their secret attic office. They had no idea I'd stolen their documentation of my planned destruction. I backed out of the driveway and forced myself to drive normally, carefully, exactly the speed limit down Maple Street toward Janet's house on the other side of town. Halfway to Janet's, the shaking got so bad I had to pull over. I sat in a grocery store parking lot and let myself fall apart for exactly 5 minutes. My children, the babies I'd raised, the adults I'd been so proud of, had spent more than a year plotting to take everything from me. They'd used my grief over Richard's death as cover to begin their operation. Every kindness had been calculation. Every concerned question about my health had been set up. The special orange juice Emma brought me every morning wasn't love. It was poison. The weekly medication organizer David had bought me wasn't helpfulness. It was control. They'd been counting on my trust, on that fundamental belief that your children love you and want what's best for you. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Drive safe, Mom. Love you. Love. That word meant nothing now. Janet lived in a small ranch house she'd bought after her divorce 15 years ago. She was 5 years younger than me, sharper, less trusting of surface kindness. I'd always thought she was too cynical, too quick to see bad motives. Now I knew she'd been exactly right. I parked in her driveway and sat there for a moment, trying to compose myself. The documents crinkled against my chest. Physical evidence. Proof that I wasn't confused or paranoid or experiencing the cognitive decline my children had been fabricating. Janet opened her front door before I could knock, took one look at my face and pulled me inside. What happened? She demanded. Tell me everything. So I did. I sat at her kitchen table and spread out the documents while my voice cracked and broke, explaining what I'd found. Janet listened without interrupting, her face growing harder with each revelation. Those bastards, Janet said finally, and the profanity shocked me because she rarely cursed. Those calculating little bastards using Richard's death like that. She picked up the medication log and read it carefully, her mouth thinning to a slash. This is elder abuse, Margaret. This is fraud. This is... She paused, searching for the right word. This is evil. Evil. My children were evil. The words still didn't feel real. Janet pulled out her laptop and started making copies of everything, scanning documents with the efficiency of someone who'd worked 30 years as a paralegal before retirement. We need a lawyer, she said. A good one. Someone who specializes in elder law and estate fraud. I know just the person. Elizabeth Chen. She absolutely destroys financial abusers. She was already dialing, already shifting into protection mode. And you're not going back to that house, Margaret. You're staying here until we figure this out. The next 3 hours moved in a blur of phone calls and documentation. Elizabeth Chen arrived at Janet's house by 2 o'clock, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who listened to my story without visible reaction until I finished. Then she smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who just spotted prey. They made mistakes, she said, flipping through the documents. Lots of mistakes. The forged signatures are prosecutable. The medication tampering is criminal elder abuse. The conservatorship fraud is a separate crime, and if we can prove they diverted your insurance money, that's financial exploitation of an elderly person. In this state, that carries serious penalties. She looked at me directly. Mrs. Harrison, do you want to pursue criminal charges against your children? Or do you want to handle this civilly? Criminal charges. Against Emma and David. Against the babies I'd nursed and raised and loved. But they hadn't loved me back, had they? I want justice, I heard myself say. Whatever that looks like. Elizabeth nodded approvingly. First, we secure your assets. I'll file emergency motions tomorrow morning to freeze any accounts they have access to and prevent them from selling or mortgaging your property. Second, we get you a full medical evaluation from an independent physician to counter any claims they've made about your competency. Third, we gather every piece of evidence we can find. And fourth, she paused, her expression sharpening, we set a trap. They don't know you've discovered their plan. That gives us an advantage. A trap. Using their own tactics against them. The idea should have felt wrong, manipulative, but it didn't. It felt like survival. Janet squeezed my hand. You're not alone in this, Maggie. Not for 1 second. That almost broke me again. That simple reassurance. Elizabeth left with copies of everything, promising to call me the next morning with a plan of action. Janet made me lie down in her guest room, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma's face as she handed me that morning orange juice, heard David's voice asking me to sign, "Just one more form, Mom. Don't worry about reading it all." How long had they been planning this? Had they discussed it at Richard's funeral, standing beside his casket in their black clothes, calculating how much his death was worth to them? The thought made me physically ill. I ran to Janet's bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. Janet appeared with a cool washcloth and ginger ale, not saying anything, just being there. Sometimes the kindness of near strangers meant more than the cruelty of intimates. My phone rang around 7 that evening. Emma's name lit up the screen. Janet looked at me questioningly. "Answer it," she mouthed. "Act normal." I took a breath and accepted the call. "Hi, honey," I said, and was proud that my voice only shook a little. Emma's concern dripped through the speaker. "Mom, you never came home from Janet's. It's getting late. Are you feeling okay? Should we come get you?" The trap they'd laid for me, turning every normal action into evidence of decline. "I'm fine, dear. Janet and I lost track of time. I'm actually going to stay the night here. We're having a movie marathon, just like old times." A pause on Emma's end. Too long. Suspicious. "That doesn't sound like you, Mom. You never stay over anywhere." "Are you sure you're feeling well?" "I'm perfectly well," I said firmly. "Just enjoying time with my sister. I'll see you tomorrow." I hung up before she could argue further. My hands were shaking again. "They're going to escalate," Janet said quietly. "Now that you're showing independence, doing something unexpected, it threatens their timeline." She was right. Within 30 minutes, my phone lit up with texts from both children expressing concern, suggesting I was having an episode, asking if I'd taken my medications. David's final text read, "Mom, please come home. We're worried about you. If you won't let us pick you up, we might need to call for a wellness check." A wellness check. Getting the police involved to document my apparent confusion and instability. Every move was calculated. Every expression of concern was weapon building. I showed the texts to Janet, who screenshot every single one for evidence. The next morning, Elizabeth Chen called at 8 sharp. "I filed emergency protective orders an hour ago. As of right now, your children cannot access any of your accounts, cannot enter your property without supervision, and cannot make medical or financial decisions on your behalf. The judge granted everything based on the evidence you provided. He was," she paused, "extremely disturbed by what he read, especially the medication tampering log. There's going to be a hearing in 3 days where they can contest the orders, but honestly, Mrs. Harrison, with what we have, I don't think they'll want this going to court. We also have an appointment with Dr. Patricia Mendez at 10 this morning. She's a geriatric specialist who does competency evaluations. She'll document that you're perfectly sound of mind." Sound of mind. Proof that my children had been lying all along. Dr. Mendez's office was in a medical building downtown. She was a kind woman in her 60s who spent 3 hours putting me through cognitive tests, memory exercises, and psychiatric screening. She asked about my daily routines, my ability to manage finances, my understanding of current events. Every question I answered correctly felt like a small victory against Emma and David's fabricated narrative. At the end, Dr. Mendez smiled warmly. "Mrs. Harrison, you are cognitively intact and fully competent. Your memory is excellent for your age. You show no signs of dementia or significant cognitive impairment. I'll prepare a comprehensive report for the court. Whatever your children have been claiming about your mental state is completely unfounded." Unfounded. Lies. Criminal lies. The relief made me dizzy. I wasn't losing my mind. I'd never been losing my mind. They just wanted everyone to believe I was. That afternoon, Elizabeth took me to the bank where I'd done business for 35 years. We met with the branch manager, showed her the forged signatures, explained the situation. The manager's face went pale as she reviewed the withdrawal slips. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm so sorry. We should have caught these. The signatures are close, but not perfect. We'll launch an internal investigation immediately and make you whole for any fraudulent transactions." She pulled up my account history on her computer screen. Over the past 14 months, someone had withdrawn $87,000 from my savings account in increments small enough to avoid automatic flags. $87,000. My children had stolen $87,000 from me, forging my signature on withdrawal slips. The manager printed everything, highlighting each fraudulent transaction. More evidence, more proof of their systematic theft. We had one more stop that day, Richard's insurance company. Elizabeth had called ahead, and they'd prepared a file on the $750,000 death benefit payout. I'd signed documents authorizing the payout, but those signatures had been witnessed by Emma and David, notarized by someone named Michael Stevens, whose license number was listed. Elizabeth made a call on speakerphone to the State Notary Commission. Michael Stevens' notary license had expired 6 months before Richard's death. The notarization was fraudulent. The entire payout authorization was invalid. "This changes everything," Elizabeth said, her eyes glinting. "This is major insurance fraud, federal level. Your children didn't just steal from you, Mrs. Harrison. They stole from a federally regulated insurance company. The penalties for this are severe. We're talking potential prison time." Prison. My children facing prison. The thought should have horrified me, but I felt only cold satisfaction. That evening, back at Janet's house, my phone rang again. Emma. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Mom, I don't know what's going on, but we received legal papers today saying we can't access your accounts or enter the house. This is ridiculous. We're your children. We've been taking care of you. If Janet is putting ideas in your head, if she's trying to turn you against us, please think clearly. You know you've been having memory problems. You know we've only been trying to help. Call us back, please. We need to talk about this." The gaslighting continued even now, even with lawyers and court orders involved. They were still trying to make me doubt my own reality, my own clear-headed discovery of their crimes. I saved the voicemail. More evidence. The hearing was scheduled for Friday morning at 9 o'clock. Elizabeth prepared me thoroughly, explaining what would happen, what questions might be asked, how Emma and David would likely respond. "They'll try to paint you as confused and manipulated by your sister," she warned. "They'll argue that you've misunderstood innocent actions. They'll present themselves as devoted children unfairly accused. Don't let them shake you. Stick to the facts. Stick to the evidence." Janet came with me to court, sitting right behind me in the gallery. I wore my best navy suit, the one I'd bought for Richard's retirement party 3 years ago. I wanted to look competent, sharp, together. Everything my children had claimed I wasn't. Emma and David arrived with their own lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit who immediately tried to approach me. Elizabeth blocked him. "No contact with my client," she said firmly. The judge was a woman in her 50s named Judge Patricia Morrison. My stomach dropped when I heard her name. Judge Morrison, the one Emma's notes had described as sympathetic to family concerns. They'd been cultivating her, preparing her for their conservatorship petition. But Judge Morrison's face was stone as she reviewed the evidence Elizabeth had submitted. The forged signatures, the medication tampering logs, the fraudulent notarization. The stolen insurance money. When she finally looked up, her expression was cold fury. "I've read the materials submitted by Mrs. Harrison's counsel," she said, "and I've read the counterfiling from Mr. and Mrs. Harrison's children claiming this is all a misunderstanding driven by their mother's cognitive decline. Having reviewed Dr. Mendez's competency evaluation completed just yesterday, I find no evidence of any cognitive impairment whatsoever." She stared directly at Emma and David. "What I do find," Judge Morrison continued, "is evidence of systematic elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, and potentially criminal behavior. The emergency protective orders will remain in place. Additionally, I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. The insurance fraud alone warrants prosecution." Emma gasped audibly. David's face went white. Their lawyer started to speak, but Judge Morrison cut him off. "I am also granting Mrs. Harrison's request for a full forensic accounting of all transactions involving her assets since the date of her husband's death. Your clients will cooperate fully with this accounting or face contempt charges. This hearing is adjourned." She banged her gavel. It was over in less than 20 minutes. Everything my children had built over more than a year, destroyed in 20 minutes of judicial review. I sat there, barely breathing, as the reality sank in. Emma tried to approach me as we left the courtroom, but Elizabeth and Janet formed a physical barrier. "Mom, please, this is all a huge mistake," Emma pleaded, tears streaming down her face. Real tears or performance tears? I couldn't tell anymore. I didn't care anymore. "We love you. We were only trying to help. Please don't do this to your own family." David stood behind her, silent, his jaw clenched tight. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "You stopped being my family when you started poisoning my orange juice," I said quietly. The words came out steady, calm, final. Emma's face crumpled. "That was just extra vitamins. You needed the supplements. You were getting weak. Still lying, still gaslighting. Even now, caught and exposed, they couldn't admit the truth." Janet took my arm and guided me past them, out of the courthouse, into the bright November morning. The forensic accounting took 6 weeks. The accountant Elizabeth hired was thorough and merciless, tracking every penny that had moved through my accounts, Richard's estate, the insurance payout, everything. The final report was devastating. Emma and David had stolen or diverted a total of $932,000 from me over 14 months. They'd purchased 2 investment properties in their names using my money. They'd paid off David's student loans and Emma's mortgage. They'd bought new cars, taken vacations, invested in David's business startup, all with my money, all while pretending to be devoted children helping their widowed mother. The accountant's report included a timeline showing they'd begun planning this before Richard died, had been waiting for his death to execute their scheme. That hurt worse than anything else. They'd waited for their father to die so they could rob me. The district attorney's office assigned a prosecutor named James Walsh to the case. He was a serious man in his early 40s who specialized in financial crimes and elder abuse. He met with me, Janet, and Elizabeth in December, spreading the evidence across a conference table. "Mrs. Harrison, I want you to understand what we're dealing with," he said. "This is one of the most extensive cases of elder financial abuse I've encountered. Your children committed multiple felonies: forgery, fraud, identity theft, insurance fraud, theft, and criminal elder abuse. If convicted on all counts, they're each facing between 15 and 25 years in prison. However," he paused, "they've indicated through their attorney that they're willing to discuss a plea agreement. A plea agreement. Avoiding trial, avoiding the full force of justice." I looked at James Walsh carefully. "What are they offering?" I asked. Walsh pulled out a document. "Full restitution of all stolen funds, plus interest. Surrender of the investment properties they purchased with your money. Formal apologies read into the court record. Guilty pleas to reduce charges carrying 5 years probation and permanent surrender of any inheritance rights or power of attorney over you. No prison time. No prison time. My children would go free after stealing nearly $1 million from me, after poisoning me, after plotting to have me declared incompetent and locked in a memory care facility. And if we reject the plea and go to trial?" I asked. Walsh's expression was carefully neutral. "We have an excellent case. The evidence is overwhelming. I believe we'd get convictions on most charges. But trials are unpredictable. Juries can be sympathetic to family members. And your children will put you on the stand and make you relive every detail of this betrayal in front of strangers, in front of cameras. I thought about that for a long moment. A trial would be public, messy, painful. Emma and David would fight back with everything they had. They'd hire experts to question my competence despite Dr. Mendez's evaluation. They'd paint me as a vindictive old woman manipulated by my sister. They'd drag Richard's memory through mud, claim he would have wanted them to have the money, twist everything into ugly shapes. Did I have the strength for that battle? Did I want that to be how this ended? Janet reached over and squeezed my hand. "Whatever you decide, Maggie, I'm with you," she said quietly. Elizabeth nodded agreement. These women, practical strangers compared to the children I'd raised, had shown me more loyalty than my own blood. "I want to think about it," I told Walsh. "Give me 48 hours. He nodded. "That's reasonable. They've given us until Friday to respond." I spent those 2 days walking through my house for the first time since I'd fled it 6 weeks earlier. The protective orders allowed me supervised access, and Elizabeth arranged for a sheriff's deputy to accompany me. The attic office was exactly as I'd left it that October morning. Emma and David had apparently abandoned it in their panic after the protective orders came through. I sat at that desk and looked at the spreadsheets again, the careful documentation of my planned destruction. The symbolic object that had started all this, Richard's life insurance policy papers, sat in the filing cabinet exactly where they'd filed it under P for payout. $750,000. Blood money. I pulled out those papers and looked at Richard's signature, witnessing his authorization for me as sole beneficiary. He'd trusted me to be cared for. He died believing our children would honor that trust. That evening, I called Emma and David. They answered together, clearly on speakerphone in one of their homes, probably huddled over the kitchen table trying to strategize. "Mom," David started, "we've been hoping you'd call. We want to—" I cut him off. "I'm calling to tell you my decision about the plea agreement. I'm going to accept it. You'll pay back every penny, you'll surrender the properties, you'll formally admit guilt, and you'll never have any claim on my estate again. In exchange, I won't push for prison time." Silence on the other end. Then Emma's voice, small and broken. "Thank you, Mom. We're so sorry. We never meant—" I interrupted again. "I'm not finished. I'm accepting the plea because a trial would be painful for everyone, not because I forgive you. I want you to understand that clearly. I will never forgive what you did. You waited for your father to die so you could rob me. You poisoned me. You planned to lock me away in a memory care facility and steal my home. Those are not things a mother forgives, Emma. Those are not things a mother forgets, David. You will spend the rest of your lives knowing what you did," I continued, my voice steady, despite the tears streaming down my face. "You will spend the rest of your lives knowing that your mother saw exactly who you really are beneath the mask. And that knowledge will follow you everywhere. Every time you look at yourselves in the mirror, you'll remember. When you have your own children someday, if you're capable of actually loving them, you'll remember what you did to the woman who loved you first. That's your real sentence, not the probation or the restitution. Living with who you are." More silence. Then David, "Mom, please, we made mistakes, but we're still your children. We still love you." That word again. Love. "No," I said quietly. "You stopped being my children when you started planning my destruction. And you never loved me. You loved my money. There's a difference. The plea hearing is next Tuesday. I'll see you in court. That's the last time I'll see you anywhere." The plea hearing was on a cold Tuesday in January, exactly 3 months after the electrician had fled my house. Emma and David stood before Judge Morrison, dressed conservatively, looking appropriately remorseful. Their lawyer read the formal plea agreement into the record. They each stated their guilt on the reduced charges of financial exploitation and fraud. The restitution amount was specified, $932,000 plus 12% annual interest, to be paid over 5 years, with the investment properties surrendered immediately. They apologized, reading from prepared statements that their lawyer had clearly written. The words meant nothing. Judge Morrison accepted the pleas, formalized the probation terms, and issued a permanent restraining order preventing them from contacting me outside of supervised legal channels. Then she did something unexpected. She looked directly at Emma and David and spoke off-record, her voice carrying acid despite its professional tone. "I want you both to know," Judge Morrison said, "that I recommended prosecution reject this plea deal and proceed to trial. The crimes you committed against your mother are among the most reprehensible I've encountered in 23 years on the bench. You exploited her grief, her trust, and her love to systematically rob and abuse her. You planned to destroy her autonomy and lock her away while you spent her money. The only reason you're not going to prison is because your mother has more mercy in her heart than you deserve. I hope you understand the gift she's given you. I hope it haunts you." Emma was crying openly. David stared at his shoes. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. "This case is concluded." I walked out of that courtroom and didn't look back at them. Janet and Elizabeth flanked me like bodyguards, ushering me through the courthouse doors into January sunshine that felt like absolution. The restitution came through over the following months. The investment properties were sold, and the proceeds returned to my accounts. The monthly payments began arriving like clockwork, processed through the court system. By April, I had most of my money back. I used some of it to fully rewire my house with a different electrician, a woman named Sarah who worked carefully and never asked questions when I requested the attic access be permanently sealed. I had that entire office dismantled, every piece of equipment removed, the space cleared back to bare rafters and insulation. I kept only one thing: Richard's insurance policy papers, the original documents from the filing cabinet. I put them in a safety deposit box at the bank, along with copies of all the evidence from the case. Proof of what had happened. Proof that I hadn't imagined it, that it had been real and terrible and survived. Janet convinced me to join her book club, and I discovered I actually enjoyed analyzing novels with 8 women my age who argued passionately about character motivations and symbolic imagery. One of them, Dorothy, became a close friend. She'd been estranged from her own son for years over a different betrayal, and we understood each other's particular grief in ways others couldn't. The grief of being betrayed by the people who should have loved you most. We took walks together through the botanical gardens, drank coffee at cafes, went to matinee movies. Slowly, carefully, I rebuilt a life that didn't include Emma or David. I thought about them sometimes, wondered if they were haunted like Judge Morrison had hoped. I didn't know. I'd blocked their numbers, returned their occasional letters unopened. They were strangers now, dangerous strangers I'd once known intimately. Elizabeth Chen became more than my lawyer. She became my friend and my estate planning advisor. We drew up ironclad documents ensuring everything I owned would go to charities and organizations that helped elder abuse victims when I died. Janet would receive a generous amount for her loyalty and love. Dorothy and the book club women would get smaller bequests, but Emma and David would receive exactly $1 each, with the specific notation that they'd already received far more than they deserved. "This will prevent them from contesting the will," Elizabeth explained. "Acknowledging them with a token amount shows you didn't forget them. You specifically chose to disinherit them. Much harder to fight in court." The thought of them receiving those formal notifications of $1 each gave me grim satisfaction. Final proof that actions have consequences, that mothers eventually see the truth. I started volunteering at the county legal aid office in May, helping other elderly people navigate financial exploitation cases. Elizabeth connected me with the program, and I discovered a purpose I'd never anticipated. Twice a week, I sat across tables from frightened seniors who'd been stolen from by family members, caregivers, or strangers. I listened to their stories, saw my own pain reflected in their faces, and helped them understand they weren't alone. I brought my own case file sometimes, showed them the evidence I'd collected, explained how I'd fought back and won. "You can survive this," I told a woman named Patricia, whose grandson had forged checks totaling $40,000. "You can get through it and come out stronger." Patricia cried and gripped my hands. "But he's my grandson," she whispered. "I raised him." I understood that particular agony too well. The work was healing in ways I hadn't expected. Every person I helped, every case we built, every fraudster we caught felt like vindication. The legal aid attorney, Marcus Williams, was a passionate advocate who reminded me of what I'd hoped my own children would become. Someone who fought for justice, who protected the vulnerable, who used their intelligence for good instead of exploitation. Marcus filed dozens of cases using the template Elizabeth and I had developed from my situation. We created a comprehensive guide for elder abuse victims on what evidence to collect, how to protect themselves, which agencies to contact. The guide was published by the State Bar Association and distributed to senior centers statewide. My pain had become a tool to help others. That mattered. That gave the whole nightmare some kind of meaning beyond just personal tragedy and betrayal. One Tuesday in June, almost exactly 8 months after the electrician had run from my attic, I was at the legal aid office when Marcus called me into his private office. His face was grave. "Margaret, I need to tell you something. Emma tried to contact the office today. She somehow found out you volunteer here. She called asking to speak with you, said it was urgent, said she needed to tell you something about David." My stomach clenched. I'd successfully avoided any contact with them since the plea hearing. "What did you tell her?" I asked. Marcus handed me a note. "I told her I'd pass along a message but couldn't guarantee you'd respond. She said David has been diagnosed with a serious heart condition. She wanted you to know he's having surgery next week and he's been asking for you." David was sick. My son, the one who'd plotted my destruction with spreadsheets and forged documents, had a heart condition. I sat in Marcus's office and waited to feel something. Concern, worry, maternal instinct. Nothing came except a distant, detached acknowledgement of information. "Thank you for telling me," I said finally, "but I won't be contacting them." Marcus nodded without judgment. "That's your right. I just wanted you to have the information to make that choice." I went home that evening and sat in my living room, the one I'd reclaimed from my children's schemes, and thought about David in a hospital somewhere facing surgery. I tried to imagine going to him, holding his hand, being the mother I'd always been before I knew the truth. The image wouldn't form. That version of me was gone, murdered by the same people who'd tried to murder my autonomy and future. Janet came over that night without calling first, which meant Marcus had probably contacted her. She brought wine and Chinese takeout, and we sat on my porch in the warm June evening. "You heard about David," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Are you okay?" I considered the question. Was I okay? "I don't feel anything," I admitted. "I know I should feel something. He's my son. He's sick. He might die. But all I can think about is the medication log, the notes about my decline, the spreadsheets planning when to put me in a facility. Those things feel more real than any maternal instinct." Janet sipped her wine. "That's because they are more real. Those things happened. They documented their intention to destroy you. Whatever biological connection you have to David doesn't erase that." She was right. Blood relation didn't create obligation, especially when that blood relation had proven itself toxic and dangerous. David survived his surgery. I knew this because Emma sent a letter to Janet's house, probably figuring I'd blocked my own mail from them. Janet brought it over, unopened, and let me decide whether to read it. I opened it carefully, half expecting some new manipulation. Emma's handwriting covered 2 pages. She wrote about David's recovery, about how scared they'd both been, about how the experience had made them reflect on their priorities and relationships. "We know we can never undo what we did," she wrote. "We know we don't deserve your forgiveness, but we want you to know that we think about you every day. We regret everything. We were greedy and cruel, and we destroyed the most important relationship we had." David said something in the recovery room, still groggy from anesthesia. He said Mom would know what to do, and I realized we threw away the person who loved us most for money we didn't even need. The letter continued with more apologies, more acknowledgement of their crimes, more expressions of regret and loss. Emma wrote about going to therapy, about trying to understand how they'd become people capable of such betrayal. She wrote about the investment properties they'd surrendered, how every time they'd driven past them before the sale, they'd felt sick with shame. "We broke something that can't be fixed," the letter concluded. "We know that. We're not asking you to forgive us or let us back into your life. We're just asking you to know that we understand what we did and we're sorry. We're so sorry. I read the letter twice, looking for manipulation, for hidden agendas, for some new scheme buried in the apologies. I found only what appeared to be genuine remorse, but I couldn't trust it. They'd been too good at seeming genuine before. I showed the letter to Dr. Carolyn Wright, the therapist I'd been seeing since February. She read it carefully, then looked at me over her glasses. "How does this letter make you feel?" she asked. I'd learned in our sessions to sit with that question, to really examine my emotional responses instead of rushing to answer. "Angry," I said finally, "because if they really understood what they did, they'd understand that apologies are meaningless. Sorry doesn't give me back the year I spent being poisoned and gaslit. Sorry doesn't erase the trauma of discovering your own children want to lock you away and steal everything. Sorry is just a word, and they're good with words." They were good enough with words to convince me to sign documents without reading them. Dr. Wright nodded. "So you don't believe their remorse is genuine?" I thought about that. I don't know if it's genuine or not. Maybe they do feel bad now. But it doesn't matter because I can't ever trust them again, and without trust, there's no relationship possible. Summer passed into fall, the 1-year anniversary of the October day that had changed everything. I marked it privately, taking myself to a nice restaurant for dinner and toasting with good wine to my survival, my strength, my reclaimed life. The legal aid office was planning a fundraiser gala for November, and Marcus asked if I'd be willing to speak about my experience. "It would be powerful," he said, "hearing directly from a survivor, especially one who's turned her pain into purpose. You've helped so many people, Margaret. Your story could inspire donors to support this work." The thought of standing on a stage telling strangers what my children had done made my stomach turn. But the thought of the funding that could come from it, the other victims who could be helped, made the discomfort worthwhile. "I'll do it," I said, "but I want to focus on recovery and empowerment, not just victimization." I worked with a speaking coach for 3 weeks, crafting a 7-minute speech that told my story without drowning in bitterness. I practiced in front of Janet and Dorothy, refined the language, memorized the key points. The night of the gala arrived cold and clear in mid-November. I wore a deep blue dress that Janet had helped me pick out, styled my silver hair elegantly, and reminded myself that I was strong, that I'd survived worse than public speaking. The ballroom held 300 people, donors and advocates and survivors. When Marcus introduced me, describing what I'd endured and overcome, the applause was warm and encouraging. I walked to the podium with my notes trembling slightly in my hands. 13 months ago, I began, an electrician ran from my attic and told me to leave my house immediately. That moment of warning from a stranger ultimately saved my life. I told them about discovering the secret office, the forged documents, the systematic theft. I told them about feeling completely alone and terrified, about not knowing who to trust. I was lucky, I said, looking out at the attentive faces. I had a sister who believed me, a lawyer who fought for me, and enough evidence to prove what was happening. But many victims of elder financial abuse don't have those advantages. They're isolated, their credibility has been undermined, and the people stealing from them have convinced everyone else that they're confused or incompetent. That's why the work of this legal aid office matters so much. That's why I'm asking you to support it generously tonight. I paused, gathering my courage for the most personal part. The people who abused me were my own children. That's a betrayal that never fully heals. But I've learned something important through this process. Family isn't just biology. Family is the people who protect you, who believe you, who stand beside you when everything falls apart. By that definition, I have more family now than I ever did before. The applause when I finished was thunderous. People stood and I saw tears on many faces. The fundraiser exceeded its goal by 40% that night, raising enough to hire 2 more staff attorneys and a victim advocate. Marcus hugged me afterward, thanking me for my courage. Strangers approached to share their own stories of family betrayal and financial abuse. An elderly man named Robert told me his daughter had stolen his pension. A woman named Grace described how her son had forged a new will. Each story was unique and devastating and familiar. We're survivors, I told them. We're not just victims. We survived, and now we help others survive too. That's power they can never take from us. I meant every word. The pain of betrayal would always be part of my history, but it didn't define my present or limit my future. December brought the holidays, the first I'd face completely alone without even the pretense of family. Janet invited me to spend Christmas with her and her grown daughter who was visiting from Seattle, but I declined gently. I needed to prove to myself that I could be alone and be okay, that solitude wasn't the same as loneliness. On Christmas morning, I made myself an elaborate breakfast, played Handel's Messiah loudly through my house, and opened thoughtful gifts from my book club friends. Dorothy had given me a beautiful journal with the inscription, "For recording your next chapter." I sat with that journal and a good pen and wrote about everything I'd survived, everything I'd learned, everything I still wanted to do. The list of future goals surprised me with its length and ambition. I wanted to travel to Ireland, where my grandmother had been born. I wanted to take painting classes. I wanted to write a comprehensive manual for elder abuse victims. I wanted to live fully and intentionally for however many years I had left. The new year arrived with snow and possibility. I enrolled in watercolor painting classes at the community center and discovered I had a decent eye for color and composition. My paintings weren't masterpieces, but they were mine, created by my own hands for my own pleasure. That felt important somehow, making things just for myself without needing anyone's approval or validation. I joined a travel group for seniors and booked a trip to Ireland for May. Planning the itinerary gave me something to look forward to, a tangible goal beyond just surviving each day. The legal aid office promoted me to volunteer coordinator in February, overseeing a team of 8 volunteers who worked with abuse victims. I trained new volunteers, supervised case intake, and helped develop policy recommendations for the state legislature. My life had purpose and structure that had nothing to do with being someone's mother. Spring arrived early that year, March bringing warm winds and blooming trees. I was in my garden planting tomatoes when a car pulled up in my driveway. I looked up, shading my eyes against the afternoon sun, and my breath caught. Emma sat in the driver's seat, not getting out, just sitting there watching me. We hadn't seen each other in more than a year, not since the plea hearing. She looked older, thinner, her hair showing more gray than I remembered. We stared at each other across the distance of my front yard. Finally, she rolled down her window. "I'm not here to bother you," she called out. "I just wanted to see that you're okay. I drive by sometimes just to make sure you're still here, still living your life. I'll go now." She started to roll the window back up, but something made me speak. "Wait," I heard myself say. Emma froze, hope flashing across her face so naked and desperate it hurt to see. I walked closer to the car, still holding my gardening trowel like a weapon or a shield. "Why did you do it?" I asked, the question I'd never asked directly, never demanded an answer to. "Why did you decide to destroy me, instead of just loving me?" Emma's face crumpled. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't try to wipe them away. "I don't have a good answer," she said, her voice breaking. "We convinced ourselves we deserved it, that we'd earned it by being good children all those years. We told ourselves you'd be taken care of, that the facilities we looked at were nice, that you wouldn't suffer. We were so focused on the money that we stopped seeing you as a person. We stopped seeing you as Mom. That's the truth, and it's horrible, but it's the truth." The honesty in her voice sounded real, felt real, but I'd been fooled by their performances before. "You poisoned me," I said flatly. "You literally put extra medication in my orange juice to make me confused and dizzy. You documented my episodes like I was a lab rat. You planned to lock me in a facility and wait for me to die so you could sell my house. Those aren't the actions of people who just wanted money, Emma. Those are the actions of people who fundamentally didn't see me as human." Emma nodded, sobbing now. I know. There's no excuse. I can't explain how we became people capable of that. David and I have both been in therapy for over a year, trying to understand it. Our therapist says we dehumanized you, turned you into an obstacle instead of a person. That's exactly what we did, and I hate myself for it every single day. I stood there in my garden, the spring sunshine warm on my shoulders, and looked at my daughter crying in her car. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to reach through the window and hold her like I'd done when she was small and hurt. That maternal instinct ran deep, carved into neural pathways by decades of caregiving. But another part of me, the part that had climbed into that attic and seen the spreadsheets calculating my destruction, remained cold and unmoved. "Your suffering doesn't undo mine," I said quietly. "Your regret doesn't give me back the security and trust I lost. I'm glad you're in therapy. I'm glad you're trying to become better people. But that's for you, and for any future people you might harm. It's not for me. I'm not part of your healing journey, Emma. I can't be." She nodded, wiping her eyes with shaking hands. "I know. I understand. I just wanted you to know that we see what we did now. We see it clearly, and it destroys us." "Good," I said, and meant it. "You should be destroyed by it. You should carry it forever. Maybe that will stop you from ever doing anything like it again." Emma looked at me with eyes so full of pain, I almost looked away. Almost. "Do you think you'll ever forgive us?" she asked. "Even a little? Even someday?" I thought about Dr. Wright's words about forgiveness being separate from reconciliation, about how I could potentially forgive the act while still maintaining boundaries against the actors. But standing there looking at Emma, I realized I didn't want to forgive. I didn't want to let it go. The anger and betrayal had become part of my identity now, had fueled my advocacy work and my healing. Forgiveness felt like erasure, like pretending it hadn't been as bad as it was. "No," I said simply. "I don't think I will, and I don't think I need to in order to be happy and whole." Emma's face showed she'd been hoping for a different answer, but she nodded acceptance. "Okay, thank you for talking to me. I won't bother you again." She started the car, then paused. "You look good, Mom. Healthy and strong. I'm glad." She drove away before I could respond, leaving me standing in my garden with dirt under my fingernails and tears I didn't remember shedding on my cheeks. I went inside and called Dr. Wright, got her voicemail, left a message about what had happened. Then I called Janet, who came right over with wine and sympathy. "How do you feel?" she asked, the same question everyone always asked. "I feel like I told the truth," I said. "I feel like I didn't pretend or soften it to make her feel better. That feels important somehow." Janet hugged me. "It is important. You don't owe them comfort. You don't owe them absolution." The Ireland trip in May was everything I'd hoped for and more. I traveled with a group of 12 seniors, exploring Dublin and Galway and the cliffs of Moher. I stood on the western edge of Europe and looked out at the Atlantic Ocean and felt my smallness in the vastness of the world. My problems, as enormous as they'd seemed, were tiny against the backdrop of ancient landscapes and endless water. I visited the village where my grandmother had been born, walked streets she might have walked, touched stones she might have touched. History and continuity existed beyond individual betrayals. Life went on. I painted watercolors of the Irish countryside, mediocre but sincere attempts to capture the impossible green of the fields. I made friends with 2 other women on the tour, Ruth and Alice, and we laughed together over Guinness in Dublin pubs and stayed in touch after we returned home. Coming home from Ireland, I felt different, lighter somehow, less weighted by the past year's trauma. I'd proven I could travel alone, make new friends, navigate foreign countries, and create joy independently. The house didn't feel haunted anymore when I walked through the door. It was just a house, my house, full of my things and my memories and my future. I hung my Irish watercolors in the living room, displayed photographs from the trip, and started planning the next adventure. Ruth and Alice wanted to do a Southwest trip in the fall, visiting national parks and desert landscapes. I said yes immediately. The world was wide and full of places I'd never seen, experiences I'd never had. Wasting time on bitterness and grief seemed foolish when there was so much living left to do. This was the gift of survival, the chance to build something new from the rubble of what had been destroyed. The Legal Aid Office asked me to testify before the state legislature in June about proposed elder abuse protection laws. I sat at a table with Marcus and 2 other advocates, facing a committee of senators and representatives who mostly looked bored until I started speaking. I told them about the secret attic office, the forged signatures, the systematic theft. I watched their faces shift from polite attention to genuine horror. Current laws make it too easy for financial abusers to operate, I explained. They rely on victims being too confused, too isolated, or too ashamed to report what's happening. We need mandatory reporting requirements for financial institutions when they see suspicious patterns. We need stronger penalties for family members who exploit their elderly relatives. We need better funding for legal aid services that help victims fight back. One senator asked if I'd support mandatory competency evaluations for anyone over 70. I looked him dead in the eye and said, no, that would be age discrimination and infantilization of elders. The problem isn't that elderly people are incompetent, I said firmly. The problem is that some family members are criminals who exploit trust and relationship. Don't punish victims by making us prove our competence. Punish perpetrators by actually prosecuting their crimes. The committee room erupted in applause from the gallery where dozens of senior advocates had gathered. The senator who'd asked the question looked appropriately chastened. 2 of the bills we supported passed committee that day and eventually became law. Mandatory bank reporting for suspicious patterns of elderly account activity. Enhanced penalties for family members convicted of elder financial abuse. Increased funding for legal aid offices specializing in elder law. My testimony had been part of making that happen. My pain had created systemic change that would protect future victims. That mattered more than any personal revenge ever could. That was justice on a scale my children's plea agreement could never achieve. Summer settled into a comfortable rhythm of volunteer work, book club meetings, and weekly dinners with Janet and Dorothy. The 3 of us became inseparable, a chosen family bound by loyalty instead of biology. We celebrated birthdays together, complained about our various aches and pains, discussed politics and books and recipes. Dorothy's granddaughter got married in July, and she invited Janet and me to the wedding. I sat in that church watching a young woman marry someone she loved, surrounded by family who actually cherished her, and I felt genuinely happy for strangers. The bitterness that had consumed me for months had transformed into something else. Acceptance, perhaps, or simply the understanding that my children's betrayal didn't define all human relationships. Good people existed. Love existed. Trust could be rebuilt with people who deserved it, even if it could never be restored with those who'd shattered it originally. August brought news through Marcus that David had written to the legal aid office asking for my address. Marcus had refused, of course, but he showed me the letter David had included for potential forwarding. I took it home and debated for 3 days whether to open it. Finally, curiosity won. David's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, probably still recovering from his heart surgery. He wrote about his health struggles, forcing him to confront mortality and regret. He wrote about Emma's depression, how she could barely function some days under the weight of what they'd done. He wrote about the restitution payments they made each month, feeling both inadequate and crushing. Every check I write feels like a drop in an ocean of debt I can never repay, he wrote. Not financial debt, though that exists too, but moral debt. The debt of having betrayed the person who sacrificed everything to raise us. David's letter asked nothing of me, demanded nothing, requested nothing. It simply existed as a chronicle of their suffering, their consequences, their slow understanding of what they'd destroyed. I don't expect forgiveness, the letter concluded. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that your absence from our lives is the greatest punishment we could have received. Greater than any prison sentence, greater than any financial penalty. We lost our mother by our own choices, and we have to live with that forever. I hope you're happy, Mom. I hope you've built a good life without us. You deserve happiness. You always deserved better than what we gave you. I read the letter 3 times, analyzing every word for manipulation or hidden agenda. I found only what appeared to be genuine remorse and acceptance. It changed nothing. I put the letter in a drawer and didn't respond. Their suffering wasn't my responsibility anymore. The fall Southwest trip with Ruth and Alice was spectacular. We spent 2 weeks driving through Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico, hiking carefully through red rock canyons and marveling at the stark beauty of desert landscapes. I painted watercolors at the Grand Canyon, terrible amateur attempts to capture impossible vistas. We ate excellent Mexican food, stayed in quirky roadside motels, and talked about everything from politics to grandchildren to the mysteries of aging bodies. Ruth had been widowed young like me. Alice had never married, had built a successful career as a civil engineer. Both had full, rich lives that proved happiness didn't require traditional family structures. On our last night, sitting around a campfire at a state park, Alice asked me directly about my estrangement from my children. I'd mentioned it obliquely, but never in detail. I told them the whole story there under desert stars. The telling was easier now, almost clinical in its recitation of facts. I'd told the story enough times in enough contexts that I could narrate it without falling apart. Ruth and Alice listened without interrupting, their faces reflecting firelight and horror. When I finished, Alice said simply, "You're the strongest person I know." Ruth nodded agreement. Most people would have crumbled. You fought back and won. That takes incredible courage. I didn't feel particularly courageous. I'd simply done what was necessary to survive, but their admiration warmed me nonetheless. That night, sleeping in my tent under unfamiliar stars, I realized I'd gone an entire day without thinking about Emma and David even once. The obsessive mental replay of their betrayal had finally started to fade. They were becoming background noise instead of the constant soundtrack of my thoughts. Healing looked like this: gradual, incremental, imperfect, but real. November marked the second anniversary of Richard's death. I visited his grave for the first time since the funeral, bringing fresh flowers and a complicated heart. I sat on the cold ground and talked to him like he could hear me, telling him everything that had happened. "The children you were so proud of tried to destroy me," I said to his headstone. "They waited for you to die so they could steal everything. I don't know if that would have broken your heart or if some part of you always knew they were capable of it. I wish you were here to help me understand how we raised people capable of such cruelty. I wish you were here to tell me it's okay that I can't forgive them. I wish you were here, period." I cried there among the graves, grieving Richard all over again and grieving the children I'd thought I had, but never really did. The children I'd believed in had been fiction, performance, masks hiding mercenary hearts. The holiday season approached again, the second without family. This time, Janet insisted I spend Thanksgiving with her and her daughter's growing family. I met Janet's grandchildren, delightful chaos in small bodies, and helped prepare an enormous turkey dinner. Sitting around Janet's crowded table, surrounded by her actual family who'd welcomed me without hesitation, I felt unexpected gratitude. Not the performative gratitude of Thanksgiving platitudes, but real appreciation for the life I'd rebuilt from betrayal's ashes. I'd lost my children, but gained genuine friends. I'd lost my naive trust, but gained clarity and purpose. I'd lost my comfortable illusions, but gained authentic connections with people who valued me for myself, not my bank account. When we went around the table saying what we were grateful for, I said simply, "I'm grateful for the people who believed me when I needed someone to believe me. I'm grateful for second chances and new beginnings." Christmas that year, I didn't spend alone. Dorothy hosted a orphan Christmas for those of us without traditional family, and 8 of us gathered for a raucous celebration of survival and friendship. We exchanged silly gifts, drank too much wine, and laughed until our sides hurt. Someone suggested we each share our worst family story, and the competition was fierce. Dorothy's son had stolen her car and crashed it while high on methamphetamine. Ruth's sister had forged their mother's will. Alice's nephew had embezzled from her business. My story of the attic office and medication tampering won the unofficial prize for most elaborate betrayal. We laughed about it, dark humor as coping mechanism, finding community in shared pain. These were my people now, the betrayed, the abandoned, the survivors who'd chosen to build new families from friendship instead of drowning in bitterness over blood families who'd failed them. The new year arrived with purpose and plans. I'd been working with a ghostwriter to turn my experience into a comprehensive guide for elder abuse victims, and the manuscript was nearly complete. Reclaiming Your Life After Family Financial Abuse would be published in March by a small press specializing in advocacy books. The advance was modest, but I planned to donate all proceeds to the legal aid office. Elizabeth had reviewed every word for legal accuracy. Marcus had contributed a foreword, and Dr. Wright had written a chapter on the psychological recovery process. The book was my testimony, my warning, my roadmap for others walking the path I'd walked. If even one person read it and recognized the warning signs of exploitation in time to protect themselves, the entire nightmare would have served a purpose beyond my personal suffering. Pain transformed into prevention was pain redeemed. February brought an unexpected letter from the State Bar Association. They were giving me their annual Civic Leadership Award for my advocacy work and legislative testimony. The ceremony was in April, black tie optional, with the governor scheduled to attend. I sat in my living room holding the letter and laughing at the absurdity of it all. 2 years ago, my children had been planning to have me declared incompetent and locked away. Now the State Bar Association was giving me an award for civic leadership. The irony was delicious. I called Janet immediately, and she screamed with excitement. "We're going shopping," she declared. "You need a dress that makes you look like the absolute queen you are." We found a gorgeous emerald green gown that made my silver hair look intentional and elegant instead of just old. I felt powerful in that dress, transformed, visible in ways I hadn't been in years. The awards ceremony was magnificent. I sat at a table with Marcus, Elizabeth, Janet, Dorothy, Ruth, and Alice, surrounded by my chosen family while the governor praised my courage and advocacy. When I accepted the award, I gave a brief speech thanking everyone who'd supported me and emphasizing that elder abuse thrives in silence and isolation. "Speak up," I told the audience of attorneys and advocates. "If you suspect a client is being exploited, speak up. If you notice unusual financial patterns, speak up. If something feels wrong, speak up. You might save someone's life." The standing ovation felt surreal. I'd spent so many months feeling powerless and terrified. Now I stood on a stage being celebrated for turning that powerlessness into power. My children had tried to silence me, erase me, diminish me to nothing. Instead, I'd become someone who mattered, whose voice carried weight and created change. Spring arrived with my book publication and a small book tour organized by the publisher. I gave talks at senior centers, libraries, and legal aid offices across the state. At each event, survivors approached me afterward to share their stories. A man whose brother had stolen his veterans' benefits. A woman whose daughter-in-law had forged a quitclaim deed to her house. An elderly couple whose son had taken out credit cards in their names and destroyed their credit. Each story was unique and heartbreaking and familiar. I listened, offered resources, connected them with local legal aid, and watched them stand a little taller, knowing they weren't alone. One woman in her 80s grabbed my hands and said, "I thought I was going crazy. My son kept telling me I was imagining things, that I was confused. Your book made me realize I wasn't confused at all. I was being gaslit." Validation mattered. Being believed mattered. I'd given that to her with my words. May brought my 65th birthday, and a party Janet organized despite my protests. She rented a private room at a nice restaurant and invited everyone who mattered. The book club women, Ruth and Alice, Marcus and Elizabeth, Dorothy and her family, volunteers from the legal aid office, even the electrician Martin, who'd warned me that October morning 3 years ago. I hadn't seen Martin since he'd fled my attic, but Janet had tracked him down and he came to the party looking sheepish. "I've always wondered if you were okay," he told me. "I felt guilty for years about just leaving you there instead of staying to help." I gripped his hands. "You did help. You gave me the warning I needed to protect myself. You could have just finished the rewiring job and said nothing. Your conscience saved my life." He teared up, relieved of guilt he'd carried for years. The party was joyful and loud, full of laughter and terrible singing when they brought out a birthday cake. These people had become my family in every way that mattered. They celebrated me not because of biology or obligation, but because they genuinely cared. The toasts were funny and touching. Stories about my advocacy work and my terrible watercolor paintings and my refusal to use proper technology. "She still writes everything in notebooks," Marcus announced to general laughter. "She takes notes in actual physical notebooks like we're living in 1970. I raised my glass. "I'm old-fashioned," I declared. "I like things I can hold in my hands, things that can't be deleted or hacked or stolen remotely. The attic office taught me that anything digital can be manipulated. Give me paper and pen any day." More laughter, but also understanding. My quirks had earned me the right to my preferences. That night, lying in bed satisfied and exhausted from celebration, I thought about how different my life looked from what I'd imagined 5 years ago. Richard had died believing our children would care for me, that I'd spend my remaining years surrounded by family and grandchildren who didn't exist yet. Instead, I'd discovered my children were thieves and liars, had fought a legal battle to reclaim my autonomy, and had built an entirely new life based on purpose instead of obligation. Was I happier now than I would have been in the timeline where Emma and David had actually been good people? Impossible to know, but I was definitely stronger. I'd discovered capabilities I never knew I possessed: the courage to fight powerful people, the resilience to survive betrayal, the creativity to build new family from scratch. Those discoveries had value, even if the price of acquiring them had been terrible. Summer brought another surprise. A documentary filmmaker named Rebecca Chen contacted me about making a short film about elder financial abuse, centered on my story. She'd read my book and been moved by it, wanted to create something that would reach people who'd never read an advocacy book. I was hesitant. Did I want my face and story broadcast more widely? Did I want the potential exposure, the risk that Emma and David might see it? Rebecca addressed my concerns directly. "We can obscure your identity if you prefer," she offered. "Use voice modulation, shoot in silhouette, change identifying details. The story matters more than your specific face. But I think there's power in you standing in front of a camera and saying, 'This happened to me and I survived.' It gives other victims permission to be visible too." She was right. Visibility mattered. Shame thrived in shadows. I agreed to participate fully, face shown, real name used. The filming took place over 2 weeks in July. Rebecca and her small crew recorded interviews with me, Janet, Elizabeth, Marcus, and several other survivors I'd worked with at the legal aid office. They filmed me at my house, in my garden, teaching a workshop for seniors on recognizing financial exploitation warning signs. Rebecca was sensitive and professional, never pushing for more emotion than I wanted to give. When she asked me to show her the attic where I'd discovered the secret office, I hesitated only briefly before climbing those stairs again. The space was empty now, just bare rafters and insulation like it had been for decades before my children transformed it. But standing there with cameras rolling, I could still see the monitors, the filing cabinets, the careful documentation of my planned destruction. "This is where I learned the truth," I said to Rebecca's camera. "This is where I stopped being a victim and started being a survivor." The documentary premiered at a film festival in October and won the Audience Award for Best Short Documentary. Rebecca arranged a screening at a local theater, and I attended with my chosen family. Watching my own story unfold on screen was surreal and painful and oddly cathartic. The film included interviews with elder law experts, statistics about the prevalence of family financial abuse, and practical advice for prevention and recovery. But the heart of it was stories. Mine, and 4 other survivors Rebecca had found through the legal aid network. Each of us had been betrayed by family members, had fought back, had reclaimed our lives. The common thread was that we'd all had someone who believed us, who helped us fight. The film's final message was simple. If you suspect elder abuse, don't look away. Be the person who believes the victim. Be the person who helps them fight. After the screening, during the question and answer session, a middle-aged woman stood up and asked, "Do you ever regret pursuing legal action against your children? Do you wish you'd handled it privately, kept it in the family?" I looked at her carefully, wondering if she was facing a similar decision. "No," I said clearly. "I don't regret it for a second. What they did wasn't a private family matter. It was crime, multiple crimes, and crimes have consequences. Keeping it private would have protected them from accountability and put other vulnerable people at risk. If they'd do it to me, they'd do it to someone else. Public consequences create public deterrence. I'm proud I held them accountable, and I'd do it again without hesitation." The woman nodded slowly, sat down, and I suspected I'd just helped her make a difficult decision about her own situation. The documentary got picked up by a streaming service and reached a much wider audience than I'd ever imagined. My inbox filled with messages from people across the country sharing their stories, asking for advice, thanking me for speaking openly. Some of the messages came from family members of abusers, people horrified to discover what their siblings or parents or children had done to elderly relatives. One email came from a man whose sister had been systematically stealing from their mother. "Your documentary gave me the courage to report her to Adult Protective Services," he wrote. "I'd been afraid of breaking up our family, but I realized our family was already broken. My sister broke it when she decided to steal from Mom. I'm just holding her accountable." These messages mattered. Every person who found courage through my story justified the pain of making my trauma public. Private suffering helped no one. Public testimony created change. Thanksgiving arrived again, the fourth since Richard's death, the third since the attic discovery. Janet's orphan Thanksgiving had become a tradition now, growing larger each year as we accumulated more people without traditional families to celebrate with. 15 of us crowded around her dining table, passing dishes and telling stories and laughing too loudly. Someone suggested we go around and share what we'd overcome this year. The stories ranged from cancer diagnoses, to job losses, to relationship endings, to family estrangements. My contribution was simple. I overcame the belief that I needed my biological family to be complete. I learned that family is something you build, not something you're born into. And I'm grateful for every person at this table who chose to be my family. Dorothy raised her glass. "To chosen family," she declared, "the family that chooses you back." We drank to that, to the beautiful truth of it. December brought a letter forwarded through my publisher. The return address showed it was from Emma. My first instinct was to throw it away unread, but curiosity won again. Inside was a single page, Emma's handwriting covering it front and back. "Mom," it began, "I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to write to you. But the documentary came out, and I watched it, and I need you to know something. I'm proud of you. I know that's absurd coming from me, the daughter who tried to destroy you. But watching you on screen, seeing how you've helped so many people, hearing you speak with such strength and clarity, I felt proud. The mother I tried to diminish and erase has become someone powerful and important. You've turned our cruelty into purpose. You've made our worst actions matter by using them to protect others. That's remarkable. That's heroic. I just needed you to know that I see it." The letter continued. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I understand those doors are permanently closed, and they should be. I just wanted you to know that David and I live with what we did every single day. We've lost jobs because people recognize our names from the documentary. We've lost friends. We deserve all of it. Our lives are small and difficult and full of consequences, exactly as they should be. But in the midst of our well-deserved suffering, we're both glad you're thriving. We're glad you found people who actually deserve you. We're glad you're happy. You always deserved happiness, and we tried to steal that along with everything else. I'm so deeply sorry we were ever born to you. You deserved better children. That's the truest thing I've ever written." The letter wasn't signed. It just ended. I read it twice, then put it in the drawer with David's earlier letter. A small collection of apologies that changed nothing but documented everything. Christmas was quiet that year. Just Janet and me watching old movies and eating too much expensive chocolate. We'd developed our own traditions now, comfortable rituals that had nothing to do with what either of us had celebrated as younger women with different families. On Christmas night, Janet asked me something she'd never asked before. "Do you think you'll ever let them back in? Even a little?" I considered the question seriously. "I don't think so," I said finally. "Not because I enjoy punishing them, but because I genuinely don't want them in my life anymore. I don't miss them. I don't wonder what they're doing or wish they were here. They're like people I used to know a long time ago who turned out to be different than I thought. There's no relationship to rebuild because the relationship I thought we had never actually existed. Does that make sense?" Janet nodded. "Perfect sense. You're not obligated to forgive people who tried to destroy you, even if they're sorry now." The new year arrived quietly, and I found myself thinking about time differently. I'd spent so much of the past 4 years looking backward, processing the betrayal, understanding what had happened. Now, approaching my 66th birthday, I wanted to look forward instead. How many years did I have left? 10? 20? 30 if I was very lucky? However many years remained, I wanted to fill them with purpose and joy, not bitterness and regret. I made a list of goals, write another book, this time about rebuilding life after family estrangement. Travel to Japan with Ruth and Alice. Learn to play piano, something I'd always wanted to do. Volunteer more consistently. Paint more watercolors, despite their mediocrity. Live fully and intentionally until the end, whenever that came. This was the final victory over Emma and David's schemes. Living well despite what they'd tried to do to me, building happiness they'd wanted to prevent. February brought a phone call from Elizabeth with unexpected news. David had contacted her office with a proposal. He and Emma wanted to surrender the remainder of their inheritance rights in exchange for one meeting, supervised by attorneys, where they could speak to me directly. They'd already paid back the full restitution amount plus interest ahead of schedule, had surrendered everything they'd taken, and now they wanted to give up anything else they might theoretically claim when I died. All they asked in return was 2 hours of my time. "You absolutely don't have to agree to this," Elizabeth said firmly. "You don't owe them anything, but I wanted to present the offer." I sat with the proposal for a week, discussing it with Dr. Wright in therapy, with Janet over coffee, with myself in long contemplative walks through winter gardens. What would I gain from such a meeting? What would I lose? Finally, I decided to do it. Not for them, but for myself. I wanted to face them one final time, not as their victim, but as the person I'd become despite their efforts. I wanted them to see exactly who I was now, to understand fully what they'd failed to destroy. Elizabeth arranged everything for March 15th in a conference room at her office, with her and their attorney present as witnesses. I prepared carefully for that meeting, choosing my words in advance, deciding what I needed to say and what didn't need saying. When the day arrived, I dressed in a sharp pantsuit and the Emerald Award ceremony dress had given me, channeling power and confidence. Janet drove me to Elizabeth's office and waited in the lobby. "I'll be right here when you're done," she promised. "Take all the time you need." I squeezed her hand and walked into the conference room where my children waited. Emma and David stood when I entered, and the changes in them shocked me. Emma had aged a decade, her hair mostly gray now, her face deeply lined with stress and sorrow. David looked gaunt, still recovering from his heart issues, moving carefully like something inside him was fragile. They both looked at me with expressions I couldn't quite read: hope, fear, shame, longing, all mixed together. I sat down across the table from them and arranged my notes carefully. Elizabeth sat beside me, a physical barrier and support. Their attorney, a young woman who looked deeply uncomfortable, sat beside them. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Emma said quietly. I didn't respond, just looked at her steadily until she dropped her eyes. The power dynamic had shifted completely. They needed me now. I needed nothing from them. That was everything.